In my videos you will often hear me talking about Sony cameras. There's a simple reason for that. I've been using Sony cameras for almost 10 years at this point, both for my personal photography and in my professional work life. Now, you might think this guy must have a good reason for it. Maybe Sony is better than the other brands, but unfortunately I have to disappoint you. There aren't any really good solid reasons to choose Sony over the other brands. And the same is valid for any other camera brand basically. So there are no strong reasons to prefer, for example, Canon or Nikon over the competition. The minor reasons why I've still stuck with Sony and why it almost doesn't matter really which brand you use, this one I will be explaining in this video. So stay tuned, but now for the intro. First off, I want to quickly address why I ended up using Sony cameras in the first place. For that we need to go back a few years. It was the year 2014. At that time I had a DSLR camera with an APS-C size sensor from Canon, the Canon EOS 600D. But I was really eager to get my first full-frame camera. Naturally, it made sense to look at full-frame cameras from Canon since I already had lenses for that system. Back then, the Canon 5D Mark III was still relatively new on the market and considered gold standard for many photography enthusiasts. The only problem was that many of my lenses I owned at the time were designed for APS-C sensor sizes. The image circle or the light circle of those lenses are way too small for full-frame cameras. I will show you a graphic so you can see the differences. Basically, you will get a black ring around your image in every shot. This meant that I couldn't use these lenses, and this also meant that aside from one single lens, which were designed for a full-frame camera that I owned at the time, I would have to replace all of my other lenses. So it didn't really matter much which camera brand I choose for my next camera. Some photography YouTubers I followed back then were raving about a new kind of camera, mirrorless full-frame cameras. At that time, as far as I know, there was only one series of these available, the Sony A7 lineup, with the Sony A7 and the A7R, where the R stands for resolution, meaning it just had more megapixels and basically worse low light performance. Driven by the advantages and the fortunate circumstance of finding a cheap Sony A7R on eBay at the time, I quickly decided to go for it. At that time I was primarily shooting nature and landscapes, where high resolution is desirable. The drawbacks of this model back then, like slow autofocus for example, or limited burst shooting, didn't really matter to me in landscape and nature photography. Another opportunity where I could have switched systems came in 2019. After a 2-year break in photography, during which I sold off most of my photography gear, more about this in the video where I explain who I am and why I want to do YouTube. But basically, at that time I was starting from scratch. At this time, most of the other brands had switched to mirrorless cameras as well, so the only reason I chose Sony again was that I was already familiar with how to operate these cameras, so I didn't have to learn that from you. Skipping forward to the year 2024, so basically right now, my gear is basically completely centered around the Sony system, so it wouldn't make much sense for me to switch. So you see, there are reasons why I use Sony, but none of them are related to the actual photo quality or anything like that. Why is that? And what differences, if there are any, still exist between camera brands in 2024? So let's find out now. As I mentioned earlier, we are not talking about the past here, because by now all manufacturers have jumped to the mirrorless bandwagon. The earlier drawbacks have long been addressed, and of course the technology has continued to improve over the last decade. Every brand has its own little features that they like to market as a unique selling point. For example, Canon cameras are known for their excellent colors, especially in the video segment. Sony, on the other hand, is famous for their outstanding sensors that have particularly good low noise behavior. However, in 2024 even, Sony's menu system isn't exactly intuitive or quick to navigate, for example. In that regard, brands like Nikon are way better. But honestly, when it comes to the actual image quality, the differences between brands are minimal. It might be that on paper there are slight differences in performance, but in reality I doubt anyone could tell which image came from a Sony, which from a Nikon, or which from a Canon camera. So if there aren't any significant differences in image quality, maybe the price could be the deciding factor in which brand comes out on top. Pricing is always a bit tricky though, because sometimes a camera manufacturer is the first to introduce a new feature that the other brands don't incorporate until a year or two later. By the time the other brands catch up, the original model has already dropped in price after being on the market for a while. In these cases, there might be a difference, but generally speaking, the price differences within each segment of cameras are relatively minor. So far, we have only talked about the camera bodies, but these are of course so-called system cameras, meaning they are part of a larger system that includes a variety of accessories. The most important of these accessories, of course, are the lenses. And accessory might not even be the right word for this, because in my opinion, the lens plays a much bigger role in the final image quality than the camera itself. When it comes to lenses, there are indeed some differences. However, one thing that's consistent across the board is the quality of the lenses. Whether it's Canon L lenses or the Nikon Z series or the Sony G Master lenses, all three brands offers truly excellent lenses in their top lineup. However, there are differences, particularly when it comes to the selection of lenses, especially from third-party manufacturers. Sony has been making professional mirrorless cameras for the longest time among the three, so they've had the most time to develop lenses for their system. Canon started later with their RF mount lenses, as did Nikon. This head start means that, particularly when including third-party manufacturers, the Sony E-mount system has the widest selection of lenses. But that doesn't mean the selections from other brands are small. There's a reason why professionals in every field of photography use Canon and Nikon just as much or even more than Sony cameras. This head start also has another significant impact on the lenses. The price. Let's take the 70 to 200mm f2.8 lens as an example, which is a super popular lens for good reasons. These are Euro prices from Europe, obviously, but I will also include a dollar price in every screenshot. The US market prices are quite similar, yet a little bit cheaper compared to the Euro. The Canon version costs a hefty $3,100 here. The Nikon version sets you back $2,770, and the Sony version is just around $2,320. So you would save around $780 with the Sony lens compared to the Canon's lens. I mean, sure, camera equipment is expensive, but think about what you could get for $780. However, there is a big but. Okay, who wrote the script? I guess it was me. Well, there's a big but in the story. The Sony lens was released before the other two, in 2016 to be exact, while Canon's version only hit the market in 2018. There's now a second version of the Sony G Master 70 to 200 f2.8, and this newer version is significantly more expensive than both of the others. It currently costs you around 3,000 euros or approximately $3,350. In the US market, these lenses are slightly cheaper, but the basic idea remains the same, whether you are in Europe or in America. By now, you are probably starting to see where this is going. Basically nowhere, actually. We are just going around in circle. One manufacturer does something and the other one follows. One brand might be slightly more expensive, but its products are newer. And at the end of the day, cameras and lenses are just like tools. Every photographer has their preferences, but claiming one brand is better than another, I think those days are simply over. At this point, I'd also like to quickly address something else here. Some might have noticed that I've only been talking about Sony, Canon and Nikon. And of course, there are many other successful camera manufacturers out there. It's just that based on my experience in the field I work in, wedding photography, almost every photographer uses one of these three systems. Aside from manufacturers like Fujifilm, who, by the way, also make amazing cameras like the Fujifilm GFX 100 II, such a beautiful camera, amazing for landscape photography. But I'm getting off track here. Anyway, there are many great camera brands out there, Leica, Hasselblad, Phase One, just to name a few. Some of these camera brands make medium format cameras with 100 megapixels or even more, which objectively can produce more detailed images than the usual suspects from Sony, Nikon and Canon we just have discussed. However, the prices for these cameras and their lenses are enormous and are not really comparable to the brands we discussed in the video. In addition to that, the selection of lenses, especially for medium format cameras, is very limited. They are incredible and fascinating devices and absolute dream cameras for certain areas of photography, but they are not really suitable for the field of photography where I earn my money with. And they are unaffordable for most people anyway. and that's why I didn't include this manufacturer in this video. And with that, we have reached the end of today's video. Most importantly, remember that the best camera is always the one you have with you. A war of which brand of camera is better than the others is completely pointless, though in my experience it's hardly a thing among experienced photographers anymore. Thank you so much for watching this video up to this point. I have plenty of other videos on photography over on my YouTube channel, so feel free to check them out. I'd love to see you there. Maybe we'll meet again in one of these other videos, but for now I wish you a great day and goodbye.